A mochi moment from Mark, who writes, I just want to thank you for making GLP-1s affordable. What would have been over $1,000 a month is just $99 a month with Mochi. Money shouldn't be a barrier to healthy weight. 3 months in, and I have smaller jeans and a bigger wallet. You're the best. Thanks, Mark. I'm Myra Ahmed, founder of Mochi Health. To find your Mochi moment, visit joinmochi.com.
Mark is a Mochi member compensated for his story.
The world moves fast. Your workday? Even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Welcome back to another episode of Investies. I'm your host, Linda Garcia, Texas State Representative and author of the book Wealth Warrior. This week on the podcast, we are going to talk about 3 things that happened last week that is clearly sending a signal that this war is getting bigger and not smaller, and that despite the headlines mostly generated from Trump that we are reaching a deal, the actions that are taking place are giving us a completely different story. Let's review how the stock market performed last week. The Dow closed negative 0.98%, almost 1% there. The S&P 500 closed negative 2.16%, and the NASDAQ closed at 3.25%. This is the 5th consecutive negative week for both the S&P and the NASDAQ. Let's go ahead and zoom out and take a look to see how these 3 indexes have performed from their all-time high. Now, we're going to do the same as last week. We are not going to count the movement that is currently taking place as I record this episode on the morning of Monday, March 30th. We are going to look at it from the close on Friday. From its all-time high, the Dow is down 10.01%, the S&P is down 8.74%, and the NASDAQ is down 12.56%. So the Dow and the NASDAQ did officially hit correction territory. The S&P 500 is still fighting it at 8.74%. Since the start of this war, we have been discussing how the price of oil is impacting the stock market, making it volatile, but also, of course, impacting the entire world. We have been discussing how the price of oil is going to throw us into a global recession. I want us to pause right here and fully understand crude oil, how it's traded, and how we can personally monitor it through the duration of this war. WTI is the chart that we use in order to check on oil prices. WTI stands for West Texas Intermediate. It's a specific type of crude oil that comes from oil fields in Texas and Oklahoma, and here's why it matters. WTI is the benchmark that the entire United States uses to price crude oil. When traders, investors, and news outlets talk about the price of oil, 9 times out of 10, they are talking about WTI. Look at WTI as the same way that we look at the S&P 500, where the S&P 500 is the benchmark for the United States in understanding our economy or where it is at. The same thing goes for WTI. It is the benchmark of oil. How does WTI trade? Here's something that might surprise you. It doesn't trade like the New York Stock Exchange, where we are open for certain hours during the day, Monday through Friday. WTI trades from Sunday evening at 5 p.m. Central, continuously nonstop through Friday afternoon. However, there is a 1-hour maintenance break every trading day from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Central. So during the work week, you are looking at 23 hours a day of trading that is taking place. On the weekends, it's closed. No Saturday or Sunday trading, of course, with the exception of the trade opening up on Sunday at 5 p.m. Central to start the week. When you hear the closing price for oil, that's the number that you will typically hear on the news and the one that matters the most. That's the settlement price from what they call the pit close, which happens at 1:30 p.m. Central Time. That's when the official daily settlement gets locked in. That's the number that you should always use when you're talking about oil prices. That is the number that the media will use. So while you can totally check out the WTI chart and see where oil is trading at any given time, normally you don't necessarily do that. You take a look at the pit price, and that is where you build a perspective from for those that look at oil and track that. Now, what is happening right now that is different, that we are experiencing through this war, is that our portfolios, the stock market, is currently trading along with the WTI on a minute-to-minute basis. It's not necessarily gathering its information and waiting for the pit close. It is in real time moving with WTI. When WTI goes up and oil reaches a higher price, the stock market goes down as it is sensing danger. However, it is important for us to note that there are caveats to these movements. For example, the stock market has broken away from the way WTI is trading when Trump sends out a post via social media, when he is holding a press conference, and he tends to be positive about what's happening. The market will then follow Trump. Typically, we started to see that in the beginning with WTI, but now we are seeing it break away from what Trump is saying. In other words, Trump is not as easily able to manipulate what is taking place with the WTI chart. This is why oil is now becoming the number one thing that we should be watching, not because you need to become an oil trader, but because oil prices are definitely the canary in the coal mine for what is currently taking place with our portfolios. Also, it's not just that we care about the movements of the oil price. It's that the oil price is in real time impacting what is currently taking place with the global economy. So this is measuring impact in real time. We watched oil go from $80 a barrel to 102, almost 103. That is a 28% move up. That is concerning. That doesn't just impact the costs of gas at the pump. This is impacting how much it costs to ship goods, being able to get goods shipped to begin with. It costs more to run factories. And when these costs go up, the amount of profit goes down and the value of these companies also goes down. And of course, that's not even discussing how it's going to impact us on an individual basis. Again, not just at the gas pump, but within our households. All right, so to really quickly recap on WTI, West Texas Intermediate Crude Oil, this is the United States benchmark, and it trades 24 hours a day, Sunday evening through Friday. The settlement price, which is the price that we typically normally care about, comes in at 1:30 p.m. Central, and currently right now it is sitting at $102, and it has been trading at 102 all morning.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Kayak gets my flight, hotel, and rental car right, so I can tune out travel advice that's just plain wrong.
Bro, Skycoin. Way better than points.
Never fly during a Scorpio full moon.
Just tell the manager you'll sue. Instant room upgrade.
Stop taking bad travel advice. Start comparing hundreds of sites with Kayak and get your trip right.
Bad advice? You talking to me?
Kayak. Got that right.
Let's go ahead and take our deep dive into this week's topic. Now that we all fully understand the importance of WTI, why we are watching it, and why it is impacting the market, we're going to get to the very root of that, the catalyst for the movement of oil. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, for the last 5 straight weeks, we have had declines across the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. The Dow dropped almost 800 points on Friday. The NASDAQ is officially in correction territory, down more than 10% from its highs. And of course, the Dow, when it dropped those 800 points, reached correction territory on Friday. What is the Strait of Hormuz? We've already talked about this in episodes past. However, we're going to do a recap on today's episode and dive in even deeper, most especially given that Iran has weaponized the strait for almost nothing, meaning that they really haven't had to match the United States dollar for dollar on this war. It is very cheap to weaponize the strait and cause harm. Not just, of course, harm to the United States, but cause global harm, which only adds additional pressures to this war. Let's just paint the picture in a very simple way. Let's say that we all live in this one neighborhood that has one road in and one road out, and everything that needs to come into that neighborhood, not just to build the neighborhood's infrastructure, but to supply the neighborhood with what it needs, has to come in through this one roadway. And now someone has taken control and possession of the roadway in a way that is not allowing for any of us to get the supplies that we need in order to live. You can see how this is eventually going to become even more detrimental as time goes on. This is why the timeline of this war is crucial. This is why Trump, time and time again, is communicating that this is going to be fast, that we are not going to last long in this war, because it implicates not just the United States, but it implicates everyone around the world. And one thing we know about Donald Trump is that he doesn't want to be hated by anyone. By most people. He wants to be beloved by his core, and he certainly doesn't want the entire world to turn against him. He wants to be seen as the smartest, most intelligent hero that has ever lived in the planet. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway between Iran and Oman. It's the narrowest point. It's only about 21 miles wide, and roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through it every single day. We're talking about 20 to 21% of global oil. So when Iran says that they control this, that's definitely not an exaggeration. They literally sit at the doorstep of the world's gas station. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is where it gets really interesting, and that this ongoing conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran Iran has figured out something very powerful. Maybe they always knew this, but now they're actually weaponizing it, is that they don't need to match the US military dollar for dollar. They don't need aircraft carriers. They don't need $1 trillion defense budget. All they need to do is park some boats in the strait and say, we decide who gets through. Iran's foreign minister did come out to say that the strait isn't technically closed to everyone, just to ships controlled by their enemies. They set up what they're calling a safe corridor. This is being managed by their military. So essentially, if you want your oil shipment to get through, you have to play by Iran's rules. You can see how easily this can deter any allyship to the United States and to Israel, as no leader of a country wants to be responsible for the inability to provide for their citizens. CNN reported this week that Iran is even floating the idea of charging a toll, literally making countries pay for the privilege of shipping through. One analyst from Bloomberg Economics put it perfectly: Iran has been surprised by how cheap and easy it is to hold the global economy hostage. Now, this potential toll isn't for enemies. Enemies cannot get through. The toll is for anyone that wants to pass through the strait. So you can see how they are trying to increase their leverage over the strait. Now, here is where I need you to really pay attention, because what happened this past week gave us a completely different story than what Trump has been telling us. There are 3 things that happened almost back to back, and when you put them together, they paint a very clear picture. The first is that we are deploying more American boots on the ground. The Pentagon announced that 2,000 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division are deploying to the Middle East. Let me tell you what the 82nd Airborne Division is, because this does matter. These are some of the most elite soldiers in the United States Army. They're based out of Fort Liberty in North Carolina. Their entire purpose is to be the first ones in when things escalate. They are known as the go bag of the U.S. military. When the 82nd gets the call, that tells you that the situation on the ground is, in fact, intensifying. In addition to the 82nd, the U.S. Central Command confirmed the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. This is made up of roughly 3,500 sailors and Marines that arrived in the Middle East just this past Saturday. And so we continue to deploy more and more military. This does not sound like a situation that is under control and in negotiations and is going to end soon. Let's also not forget that Trump had previously signaled that he did not want any boots on the ground. So the fact that the Pentagon is now deploying ground troops tells you the situation has moved beyond what airstrikes and naval operations can handle. That is a really big contradiction to what Trump is saying and what is actually happening. The second piece of information we received: Russia is helping Iran. Now, this isn't anything new. We've been speculating that, or we've been knowing that for weeks now. But here is what is different and what took place last week. The president of Ukraine, Zelensky, came out to say that Russian satellites took photographs of the U.S. airbase in Saudi Arabia on March 20th, 23rd, and 25th. And then on March 26th, Iran attacked that exact base. Zelensky, who has experience being attacked by Russia, said that when Russia photographs something once, they are preparing. When they photograph it a second time, it's like a simulation. When they do it a third time in rapid succession, it means an attack is coming in 1 or 2 days. While previously we did understand that Russia is helping Iran, this is now escalating to Russia is providing real-time specific targeting data to the point where we can now draw a direct line between their satellite photos and Iranian strikes happening 24 to 48 hours later. This is just working towards the confirmation that there are more major world powers involved behind the scenes and that this conflict is much more complicated to resolve. And now the third reason. Israel is expanding in Lebanon. So while all of this is happening, Israel announced it's pushing further into Lebanese territory and issued new forced evacuation orders for civilians in southern Lebanon. This matters because Hezbollah, the militia that operates in Lebanon, is funded, armed, and directed by Iran. Hezbollah is essentially Iran's hand in Lebanon. So when Israel expands operations against Hezbollah, that's another front in the same war. While those three reasons came in as headlines alone in this last week, I think it's really important for us to understand that they're telling a bigger story, which means that this war is just getting bigger. And I think that the market is finally starting to understand that. We're definitely seeing that in the WTI, and I think we're finally starting to see it in the stock market. However, we did receive a social media post from Trump that did move the stock market in a positive direction. Roll my eyes. I cannot believe that we continue to overlook what is taking place, but I think that the movement isn't as powerful as it once was in the beginning of this war. Let me share what Trump said. This morning, Monday, March 30th, Trump said that he will completely obliterate Iran's electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island if strategically vital Strait of Hormuz is not immediately opened and a peace deal is not reached shortly. The United States of America is in serious discussions with a new and more reasonable regime to end our military operations in Iran. He goes on to say, great progress has been made, but if for any reason a deal is not shortly reached, which it probably will be, and if the Strait of Hormuz is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island, and possibly all desalination plants, which we purposefully have not touched yet. Futures this morning in the stock market were showing that we were headed towards a down market. He comes out and says that. The market pumps up. And then shortly after it pumps up, it starts to trickle down. And we are now very close to negative territory. NASDAQ has already hit negative territory, and the Dow and the S&P is on its way back down. Now, what didn't react to his statement was oil. I do think that the market is underreacting. I do think that. And I don't mean to be an alarmist. Just looking at historical patterns and the type of president that we are currently dealing with, I do think creates confusion. I don't think we've ever dealt with a president in the past that lies in this way and moves the market based on an agenda that he has or something that he would like to have us believe. Typically, in the past, I have always said to trust the market. The market is smarter than we are. Collectively, the market has much more intelligence, access to information, and so you have big money movers, what we call whales in the market. And typically, the whales will know something that we don't. And so we should trust that when the market starts to move. If you are in our Patreon community, then you know that I have been wrestling with this for weeks now. I feel a sense of confusion, and I don't always feel that. Of course, I'm going through this for the first time. I don't have experience where I can look at patterns or see how things unfolded in the past. This is the first time I'm navigating a new world. I'm having to learn what the Strait of Hormuz is just alongside you all. And so I do feel something is off here. I feel like maybe The market is just as confused as I am, which is such a weird thing to say, in that it's not sure to trust what the president is saying or to trust what it is actually seeing. Is the market getting gaslit right now? I think maybe yes. I've been wrestling with this for weeks now. I go back and forth, back and forth. Right now, I'm at the spot where I think the stock market is getting gaslit. So with that being said, based on what took place last week, that is now telling us that this is just getting bigger and it is moving in the opposite direction that he is saying we are moving in. It is contradicting what he is telling us. I do think that we have to maybe brace ourselves a little bit for another leg down, for sure. If we don't see a resolve and he keeps stringing us along week after week and the war keeps getting bigger based on actions he's taking, then of course I anticipate for the stock market to drop even further. This most definitely isn't a time for panic. At least I am not in panic. I am just dealing with the reality of the situation and my expectations if this continues, which all signs are pointing to this continuing. I think that this is an incredible opportunity, just like any other opportunity that we should most likely prepare for. What I want to remind you of is that we cannot time the market. We just don't have a crystal ball in this way. We can't. We have to let the market tell us how it's going to react. We don't get to predict how it reacts. We can have an idea that it's going to crash, but we don't know when it's going to crash and how fast it's going to crash. And the most important part of that experience is that you do not know when it is going to recover. And it can recover immediately. And if you try to sell out and time the market, that is never the best thing to do. The best thing to do is to stay put and potentially consider building up your portfolio during a crash. This is a tried and true strategy to investing. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Investies. We still have spots in Wealth Warrior, the course. If you want to join us April 25th and April 26th, you can head over to wealthwarriorcourse.teachable.com. We will have a link in the show notes. I go over all kinds of strategies and build your conviction for having a portfolio for the long term, which is really going to be beneficial right now during these volatile times. I'm your host, Linda Garcia. A special thank you to the team, Asia Simpson, Eliza Smith, and Jacob Winnick.